Behold currently, you are entirely a star child. Begin your power. Go, laugh. Oh boy, I'm gonna have a hard time getting through this episode without constantly cracking up because I have one more episode of Words, our translation series, to do for you guys about register. We took a little break. I went on vacation, then I interviewed my buddy Johnny, but every now and then on Fridays, pretty regularly actually, lately, I've been talking to you guys about issues in translation because I often get questions about how to pick a good translation, how to read translations and seek out, good and bad versions, even if you don't speak the original language. And this is my bread and butter. This is the universe I live in. It's what I think about all the time. And I haven't realized until recently that there's a lot of stuff that you think about all the time if you are doing translation and reading things in foreign languages that maybe doesn't even occur to people who don't do that stuff, who aren't in that field, don't participate in that shop talk, because why would it? Why would you think about it? But actually, it turns out language is one of the most profound things, one of the most mysterious things in human life. Translation is one of the best and most interesting ways to think about it, and you do not have to be an expert in various languages to appreciate and care and think about the issues that this sort of stuff raises. It raises all kinds of other concerns about how we express ourselves, how we communicate, how we make connections that go way beyond just the matters of translation. By the way, if you do like this kind of thing and you're interested in my takes on translations, I just published at the Claremont Review of Books, where I am an associate editor, a review of Emily Wilson's Homer translations. If you're familiar with Wilson, you might know that she's just vastly famous, like celebrity translator, and some of her fame has to do with the fact that she is the first woman to translate the Odyssey into English. Some of it just has to do with like big publishers and publicity and all that. She's got like a MacArthur Genius Grant. I really do not like her translations. I think she's way overhyped. And so I wrote a long essay at CRB, at ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com, about why I think that is. So you should go check that out. Subscribe to CRB if you want to read me on this. But here on this show, I do just want to carry on our conversation about register, because that has been a really fruitful question. I know I have a lot of other questions, both in the general mailbag and for words that I am going to get to and sort through them. But I have one more episode to do here about tone and register and the level of formality or other kinds of self-presentation, voice that you get in a translation. I've been talking about that, and especially about translations that tend to bring the register of a piece down to earth. So last time we did this, I read from the Gen Z Bible, in which you got a bunch of Gen Z slang, and I was observing how the Gen Z Bible doesn't quite make it to the standard of translation, in part because the register is part of the original message. And so one of the books that I get asked about a lot is The Message, which is this very casual or vivid, you might say, Bible translation that tries to make the words really immediate for people. And the conclusion that I reached, just to remind you, is that The Message does have some really interesting renderings in it, and it is a serious engagement with the original text. So it's not like this is some kind of sham project, but it isn't a translation for the reasons that I argued last time. And I'm going to get into a little more of that this time. But the message really is a paraphrase or an even, in some points, a commentary on the Bible because of how much interpretation it introduces and how greatly it departs from the actual content of the original language. And so if you're going to use the message, which I think you should if you like it, you got to know what you're getting. It's not really fair to present it as a translation or to use it as a translation. What you should use it as is almost like a commentary, almost like a line-by-line commentary on some one person's view of the Bible rather than the Bible itself. But in the process of dealing with all this, I've been talking about mostly the transition from high to low register. And so now I want to flip that on its head and talk a little bit about the transition from low to high register and what that does to a piece and what the pitfalls are of that. Because it's not just that, oh, low register is bad and slang is bad, and when we move into low register, we end up doing bad stuff. It's also that if we take something out of its more earthy context, you do end up with something that is too elevated, too stilted, too much. So I want to talk about that, but first, since we're on the subject of translation, now is a great time for me to remind you about my friends at the Ancient Language Institute. If you don't ever want to have to deal with translations, again, when you're reading ancient languages, you can go to ancientlanguage.com/youngheretics and get your hands dirty with the original languages: Latin, ancient Greek, biblical Hebrew, and now even Anglo-Saxon. These guys are masters at teaching this stuff. They can teach it to people at every level. Wherever you're at, they will meet you there. If the idea of foreign languages is terrifying to you, or if you've already had some Latin or Greek, wherever you are right now, Ancient Language Institute has a course for you. Their summer term, the registration for their summer term, closes on April 13th. So that's rapidly approaching. These registrations do fill up quickly. It's ancientlanguage.com/youngheretics. And the best kept secret on the internet is the secret promo code for Young Heretics listeners only. People who listen to or watch this show. This is not written down anywhere, but if you're listening to my voice, you can use the promo code Spencer, SPENCER, and you'll get 10% off as a discount for my listeners at the Ancient Language Institute. One more time, that's ancientlanguage.com/youngheretics. But I kid a little bit, because even people who do read ancient languages think about translation, and in fact, you might find that if you embark on a quest to read ancient Greek so that you never have to read a translation again, you actually end up finding that the joke is on you, and that you are even more interested now in issues of translation and the problems of rendering things in English. But I leave that up to you to decide once you go check out ALI. For now, for all of us, let me talk about register, and particularly moving from low register to high register. There's a moment that I kept thinking about when I was recording some of these episodes in Shrek, the first Shrek movie, where Eddie Murphy is playing the donkey, and Fiona, Shrek's loved one, says to her at some point, it says something about Shrek and his steed. And at this point, Donkey has not been metamorphosed into a big stallion, so he's just the goofy donkey. And he looks at Shrek and he says, "You hear that? She thinks I'm a steed," which is a really funny joke that depends on register, because a steed is a word you use for an animal that you ride, or an animal companion who is noble and elevated and worthy of chivalric literature. Arthurian knights have steeds. Ogres do not have steeds. Donkeys, even if you ride on them, are not typically referred to as steeds. And so the joke that she thinks I'm a steed is like, this word is clearly in a higher register than this character deserves. And so registers of words, even if they are interchangeable, words with two different kinds of register convey different things about the relationship between the characters, the nature of the individuals, and so on and so forth. She thinks I'm a steed. Here's a version of that is also hilarious, and that is, you might have seen it, a meme going around the internet in which somebody took the Smash Mouth song All Star and translated it, I presume using Google Translate or some other software, into Aramaic. And Aramaic is the sort of more direct and less formalized version of biblical Hebrew that many of the characters in the Bible would have spoken on a daily basis. When they weren't in synagogue, they would have been speaking Aramaic. So this is an ancient, what's called a Semitic language, very closely related to biblical Hebrew. And this person has fed Smash Mouth into the Aramaic translator and then back into English to see how the computer deals with an Aramaic text that originally comes from this song, Smash Mouth's All Star. Now, fun fact, I actually know all of the lyrics to All Star. And so I am reading this translation, which is not the same thing as the original lyrics, but I can sing the whole thing, and we'll be comparing it as I read to the actual lyrics of the original thing. I went to a lot of sock hops in like middle school and high school when I was a kid growing up in Southern California. Danced to this song a lot, shouted to this song a lot. It's engraved into my memory. And so along with like the odes of Keats, forever stamped in the grooves of my brain will be the lyrics to Smash Mouth's All Star until I lapse into dementia or run for president or both. So let's read this kind of what happens when you perform this process on the lyrics to All Star. I'm not going to sing it right now. If we ever meet in person, ask me to do it, I guess, if you want. But here we go. There was one who said unto me that the universe was going to cause me to tremble, that I am not the sharpest cutting implement in the storehouse. Okay, so this is, somebody once told me that the world was going to roll me. I ain't the sharpest tool in the shed. And the joke, obviously, I mean, it's lame to explain jokes, but this one depends on how absurd it is to read the lyrics of this, like, super casual kind of surfer boy punk rocker song in the tone and the register of what is effectively the King James Bible. And I want to talk about why that has happened with this translation software, but let's do a little bit more of it just to give you a sense. She had the appearance unto me as a stupid one, with her finger and her thumb in the frame of a Greek gamma upon her forehead. She was looking kind of dumb with her finger and her thumb in the shape of an L on her forehead. And that use of the Greek gamma is really interesting because the capital Greek letter gamma looks kind of like an upside down L. And this is a little example of something that you do have to do sometimes in translation, which is find analogs for whole entities or cultural phenomena that just don't exist in the target language. So in this case, what's happened is the computer or the person has translated this text into Aramaic, but realized that there was no letter L when Aramaic was spoken. And so there needed to be some analogous image that was used, and the image of the Greek gamma looks like the letter L. But observe the problem that has emerged here, because the Greek letter gamma is the sound g, whereas the English letter L is the sound l and stands for loser. That's what the joke is in the song. That, oh, what was she doing? She was this L on her head, and in fact, he was calling her a loser. I can't believe I'm engaging in this level of close reading here, but an important point. There is no analogous word that's being invoked here. There's no letter start. I mean, you could come up, I suppose, with a word starting with gamma in the Greek language that meant dumb person or failure or something. But there was no tradition in the ancient world among the Greeks that people who spoke Aramaic might have encountered of putting your fingers up and trying to call somebody a loser this way. So the meaning of the joke has been lost. The surface layer of the joke has been retained, but one of the ways in which this, I think, computer has ineptly accomplished the aim of translation is it hasn't rendered the right underlying meaning. It's given you kind of a word for word or a thought for thought, image for image translation of what's going on, but not successfully delivered something that would land with the target audience of Aramaic speakers as conveying meaning. And so now the listener of the Aramaic song is in the same position as the speaker and not understanding what this joke is supposed to be, whereas we're actually supposed to be in the position of somebody in the audience who is in on the joke when there's dramatic, and that creates the dramatic irony of the song, which has now been ruined by this transition, and you would want to find some other way of conveying a hand symbol that was common in the ancient world that did mean you suck or you're lame, and then the original listener would be able to understand. You could describe that in a more generalized way. So this kind of thing does happen in translation a lot. You will get jokes that you either have to footnote or you have to come up with an analogy, something that works the same way in the modern culture. So a great example of this would be the idiom sending snow to Eskimos or carrying coals to Newcastle. And the idea here is if you do something that's redundant, that you don't need, then you're offering coals to Newcastle, where they have lots of coal and they don't need coal, or snow to Eskimos, where they have plenty of snow. And you might say he could sell snow to Eskimos, meaning he's such a good salesman he could convince you need something you don't need. And there's another version of this, which is sending owls to Athens. And these different kind of cultural idioms make sense in different contexts. So if you are somewhere where people know about Newcastle, sending coals to Newcastle makes sense to say. If you are not, then you need to say owls to Athens, or whichever one is really gonna land with your audience. If you were translating a text, you might need to find the one that's gonna make sense in the particular locale of the people that would make sense for the characters to say, and so on and so forth. So that's what's going on here, and that's, that kind of mistake and fumble is part of why this thing is funny. But the other reason that it's funny, of course, is that it's incredibly over dramatic and overblown for like a song that we all kind of remember with a certain irony and found it, pleasing but ridiculous. So let's talk about why that has happened. Because interestingly, Aramaic is not inherently a language that only ever operates in a high register. That's not the case with Aramaic. And in fact, I would say that there's an analogy to be made between Aramaic and Hebrew and versus like the way that Koine Greek works relative to Attic Greek. So many people know that the Bible, the New Testament, is written in Koine Greek, which is a version, a dialect of Greek that has a more like wide range of casual registers that can be used to talk in a way that a lot of people would have understood at the time. In fact, that's what Koine means, is just common Greek. Some people would even say street Greek. And Aramaic, which is not the same thing as Hebrew, but which is closely related, similarly has a kind of more down-to-earth vibe, a more down-to-earth quality. So why should it be that this program or this person is doing this kind of translation and then ending up, when they come back into English, with this hyper-elevated tone? Well, I suspect the reason is that we associate old-timey with grandeur and elevation. And part of this is because, in fact, in the ancient world, there was more of a sense of formality. They did have kind of a more affection for and time for courtly and elevated turns of phrase. So there are passages in the Bible that are like that. And as I said last time, wouldn't want to bring it all down to the level of the street. But there are also resources available in ancient languages to do slang and to talk in kind of a chill way. And sometimes that, in fact, often that gets lost when you do translation into ancient languages or out of ancient languages. You will often find like translations of Aristophanes that are way too ornate because people think, oh, old-timey times, ruffles and kind of elevation and so forth. And this is actually a point that Emily Wilson gets right, where she'll say like there's this reflexive natural tendency to just overinflate the bombast when you go back in time. And actually sometimes there are very casual and lowbrow versions of things. So the computer is suffering from a generalized assumption that many human translators also suffer from. Again, assuming here that there's a program that's been used to do this. I think there has. But if it was a person, same point, right? That this is somebody that just thinks old-timey and thinks high level. And so then when you go back into English, you get basically a King James Bible version of Smash Mouths. You don't have to do that. It's just a failure of register. Now, let me make a distinction between this and what I'm about to say about the message. The point of this joke, the reason why it's funny, is that this is a translation. In other words, you can read every line of this, and if, like me, you know the whole song, you will know what it's supposed to be. And so you will laugh when you see that, you will not know if you do not go is supposed to be, you never know if you don't go. That's what a translation looks like. It's a bad translation because it doesn't effectively preserve and convey register where it could have, and it falls prey to certain knee-jerk assumptions about the ancient world, but it is still a translation. In the message, oftentimes what you will get is a register that's defensible, that mostly comes to do with the effort of trying to make the gospel or the Bible more generally kind of vivid and understandable. But so you do sometimes get an okay register in the message, but you get a failure of translation, which is to say you get the introduction of wholly new ideas and explanations that aren't original and native to the text. And I want to commend to you, if you're interested in this stuff, a page by Gary Manning Jr. at Biola University, the Good Book blog. It's called Problem Passages in the Messages. I'll drop a link in the show notes. But he goes through a lot of these. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them. Many of them are just kind of additions that work kind of as little marginal paraphrases or glosses. So, for example, in Ephesians chapter 2, we have this. The literal translation, or the more kind of standard translation, is you once walked according to the way of this world, according to the ruler of the power of the air, the spirit who is now at work in the children of disobedience. In Greek, that's kataton archonta tes exousias to aeros to pneumatos. But in the Message, we don't get that at all. You let the world, which doesn't know the first thing about living, tell you how to live. So this is an intervention into the text to make it more palatable to secularist or naturalist modern thought. Once you do that, you're not translating. You are, in fact, trying to shield the reader from things that might be difficult or challenging, which is not one of the tools in the translator's toolbox. So in an effort to make it super relatable, he's not only altered the register, but he's shaded over into altering the meaning or the work itself. He's actually cut pieces out of it. That's sort of interesting, and there's a lot of examples here of that. But I'm actually more interested in some of these ones where he tries to gloss or expand upon the ideas. And one in particular I wanted to call your attention to, that's Matthew 5, verse 11 to 12. This is also in this Biola piece. The original, if you want to put it that way, the kind of more direct translation is, you are blessed when they revile you and persecute you. This is Jesus speaking. When they revile you and persecute you and falsely say every kind of evil against you for my sake. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. This phrase, falsely say every kind of evil against you for my sake, is panponeron, all bad things, all foulness, kathumon, against you, pseudomonoi, lying, hanaken emu, because of me or for my sake. Here's the message. Count yourselves blessed every time people put you down or throw you out or speak lies about you to discredit me. What it means is that the truth is too close for comfort, and they are uncomfortable. So that's a whole addition. That's like a sentence that is just not there in the original. And you might think, why did you do that, bro? And the answer is because he's glossing the word pseudomonoi in the same way that if you listened to the previous episode about Genesis and what he does with Genesis, he glosses the words heaven and earth as all that you see, all you don't see. And here, pseudomonoi, which is a participle that explains what they're saying. The aposin is the active verb in the sentence. They say every bad thing against you. And then often in Greek, you will get a main verb that is modified or extended and kind of shaded with a participle, I should say a verbal adjective. That's what we have here, pseudomonoi, hanaken emu. And you could make a very, very tenuous case, and I would not want to make this case because I don't think this is right, that inherent in the concept of the pseudomonos, he who lies, is this sense of trying to distance yourself from the truth. And that's what you get with what it means is that the truth is too close for comfort and they are uncomfortable. The reason I find this interesting is there are versions of this phenomenon that are real, and sometimes in translation there's a legitimate move you can pull, where often ancient languages will have fewer words, and the words will be more dense with meaning. And so in order to get that sense across, you might consider one legitimate tool that you have in your toolkit as a translator is to expand one word into two words or two synonyms, or even to repeat in a way that sounds natural in English but not in Greek or Hebrew. And this sometimes goes the other way around too. So sometimes in Greek you would say phobo phobon, I fear a fear. This is called the figura etymologica, where the verb form and the noun form are next to each other. In Greek that sounds very graceful. In English not so much. And it's something that's super common in Hebrew. And so you'll have to vary the different senses of phobo, of I fear, in order to get something across in English that's sort of equivalent or analogous. So you might say something like he was, he was frightfully terrified, for example, would be a good way of getting that across in English. And then for, another kind of example of this would be if you're saying like he came to a certain place in Hebrew, you have one verb, bo, that kind of describes a lot of different comings and goings. And sometimes you might want to use multiple words in the same passage for that idea in Hebrew. That's kind of almost what's going on here in Pseudomonoi with the message, that he's like trying to draw out latent meanings by using more words. But he's gone like way, way overboard with that to a whole new sentence that is not really defensibly in the text. So hopefully, as we start to talk through some of this, both the kind of funny version of the All-Star translation and the more serious version of the Message translation, you can start to see how shifts in register are part of translation and affect the quality of your translation. But shifts in meaning kind of bring you out to the end of that spectrum, to the point where you're not doing translation at all. You're doing kind of like explanation or gloss. And that's the line that you want to be looking for and trying to draw. If you're comparing two English translations, you don't speak the original language, but you notice that one of them has all this material that isn't in the other, then you want to look into and think about whether that longer translation is actually adding stuff in. So, and you will find this. I covered one example of it in one of the prior episodes when I talked about Maria Devana Headley's Beowulf, that she was just saying stuff, like pulling stuff out of her kind of like what the text makes her think. That's not a translation at all. The All-Star Smash Mouth translation is just not a good translation, although it remains a translation. And the reason it's not a good translation is, once more, because register is part of the meaning of the text. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. That's all I'm going to say about the Message. Once again, my claim here is not that this is like a work of evil, but that it is not a translation and you should treat it as such. And I will continue to take these sorts of questions, so please lob them at me. I have a big backlog of them, but I'm welcoming more, and I will be sifting through them to find a new one to do very soon. That's it from me. Please do share and rate and review this podcast, and go check out the CRB essay and all that stuff. There's a lot of other things linked in the show notes that you can take a look at. But for now, I will bid you farewell and see you next time for more truth, beauty, and the stuff that matters.